Is it important? That would be the question that I would use to sum up this story. Now, I think some background would be helpful to you. In Jewish law, the law of Moses, there were a number of things that were put down that had to do with cleanliness, clean and unclean. The vast majority of it originally was intended for priests, people that in the process of worship. The idea was they were to do these ritualistic things in order to prepare themselves to worship God. As years went on, though, the rabbis, the tradition sort of shifted by the rabbis' teaching. And so these became things that everyone was expected to do. Now, that's actually a positive development, because now what they did by taking these ritual washings, if you will, bringing them into the home, it made it possible that every time you sat down to eat a meal, it was, if you will, a religious experience. And so that was the expectation of the day, and then you get to this moment in Jesus' ministry early on. I don't know if you caught it, but the scribes and the Pharisees in this story had come from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is to the south. Galilee, where Jesus is to the north. This was a heck of a journey for them in that day and age. And so it would appear that what had happened, word of Jesus and all that he was doing, had gotten to the religious leaders in Jerusalem. And they sent a delegation to, go check this guy out. Let's see what's going on. And so they show up and they look around and they quickly notice that Jesus' disciples, they didn't wash their hands. Mind you, this is a ceremonial washing. That is, you're supposed to wash your hands in a very particular way. And they didn't do it. And so they say to Jesus, hey, what's with your disciples? They don't do what they're supposed to do. And I know Jesus doesn't use this question, but it seems to me that Jesus' response to the scribes and Pharisees is summed up by, is that important? Because, it sort of seems like what the scribes and Pharisees are getting caught up in is that this is a test of your religious fervor, if you will. And so if you do these things, well, clearly you are a great and religious person. But of course, that's not true. I mean, I hope it's not true of any of you here, but you can come to church week after week after week after week, and you are outwardly doing something religious, but your heart could be far away from God. And so Jesus knows this, and of course, Jesus has the advantage of knowing their hearts. And he knows that they're just looking at this. They're using this as this little test. They don't wash their hands properly. So clearly your whole ministry is just must not be any good. And Jesus is, I think, looking at them going like, that matters? That's important? And so as I was wrestling with this a little bit, I thought it might be helpful for us to ask that same question in the 21st century. Is it important? Like, in other words, what is it in our lives that needs to be important? And maybe asking it a different way, what are things that we make important that should not be? I can break this down for you, I think, in two big categories. There, I think, are for many of us, there are things that are in and of themselves important, but we cannot do anything about them. And so when we make them important in our own lives or try to do so, it's sort of there's no value to it, I guess. I mean, most of what you see on the news would fall into this category. If you've been watching, all the stuff from Afghanistan the last week or so, that's important, I get that. But you and I, unless I don't know something about your secret life, you and I don't have anything to do with American foreign policy. And so while I might want to pray about that, I might be concerned about it at some level, but for the most part, I don't need to make that crazy important. In other words, I don't need to get up in the morning and pull my hair out. It's like, oh, what is going on in the world? because I can't do anything about that. I could be very concerned about this storm that's going to hit Louisiana and that part of the coast, but I can't do anything about it. I don't control hurricanes. I don't have that ability. And so I need to be careful to, sure, I want to be concerned about it, but I don't want to make it more important than it, in my particular situation, than it needs to be. That's different, of course, for someone in the path of that storm. Another category, though, is just things that we make more important than they actually are. And probably the best example of that for most of us is our appearance. You know, if you look this up, you can find crazy numbers, $1 billion we as Americans spend on things to make ourselves look good, whether that is clothes or cosmetics or shampoo or gym memberships or weight loss programs, whatever it is. And you have to ask yourself, is it that important? And I'll tell you, it's not. That was the whole point of that crazy idea about my hair and the homily I did for the teens. I was trying to point out to them that, yes, they think that if something's not right about them, they don't look quite right, they think that everybody's going to notice and everybody's going to care. And they're wrong. If you walk in here some Sunday or you walk into the store and something's not right, yeah, people may well notice, but they don't care. Not as much as you think they do. They don't care enough, let's put it this way, they don't care enough for us to be spending that kind of money on all this stuff about our appearance. And so there's an example where I think we make something more important than we should. Not that it's unimportant, but we just make it more important than it should. There's all these examples from church. There's a church I know right now, they're considering a renovation of their church, the sanctuary. And part of it has to do with the location of the tabernacle. And I can tell you right now, it hasn't even started, and it's already caused a lot of division in that church. Because some people think the tabernacle needs to stay where it is right now, because that's the way the church was designed. Other people, it's one of those litmus tests for them. They think the tabernacle has to be in a certain place, otherwise it says something about the church. And no matter what side of that you're on, both sides, what they're going to end up doing, I have seen this sadly before, is they're going to make the decisions about the renovation of the church more important than the relationships they have with their fellow parishioners. The same thing that happened to a church I know of in Ocala, who split over the election. The election was so important to them that it was more important than their love of neighbor, of each other. And so one side sort of prevailed in the church and the other side basically left. That's just wrong. That's just all there is to it. It's wrong. The election, sure, every election matters. No election is important enough to split a church over. It just isn't. That was one of those things where I could just picture Jesus looking at that congregation going like, is this important? To give you a different example, in the world of sport, something you probably missed in the news, but about a week ago, a gentleman set a milestone world record in track cycling. He rode 4 kilometers in under 4 minutes. That may not mean much to you, but put it this way, from a standing start, he averaged a little more than 38 miles an hour on a bicycle. It is staggeringly fast. No one has ever beaten the 4-minute mile mark. It's amazing. I mean, even just talking about it, I cannot get my head around riding a bicycle on level ground that fast. But in order to do it, he rode a bicycle that cost just a little more than $40,000. Now, you don't want to simplify this too much because lots of things like that, the technology that's used in those things eventually becomes commonplace things for all of us that we all benefit from, but still, you have to look at that and say, oh my word, was that important? Was it that important to ride a bike that fast? So you might want to pause then as we conclude just by asking yourself, well, what is the right answer to this? Well, you get it from Jesus, of course. What's most important, Jesus says? Love God, love your neighbor. That's it. So as these things come up and you and I wrestle with them, no matter what they are, whether it's, traffic or who knows what, that something that just becomes important to us, you might just want to pause and ask yourself, okay, let me take a step back and let me look at this a little more objectively and ask, am I being like the Pharisees who are just looking at one thing and making whole big judgments because of it, because this thing is important? Maybe I should take a step back and realize, there's something in it, but it's not that important. It's not more important than my love of God. It is not more important than my love of other people. And in which case, maybe everything just seems to sort of tone down a little bit. Everything's a little more in perspective, and then we can live our lives a little better. As a matter of fact, I think as we tone things down like that, then we have a better chance to talk to people and listen to people and find out, well, this isn't important to me, but it's important to you. And maybe I learn more about that. I have better conversations. And by doing that, I'm loving my neighbor, which is exactly what Jesus wants us to do.